morning.
Good morning.
There's a line from a German playwright, Bertolt Brecht. He one of his plays, the Three-Penny Opera, was staged on Broadway and is somewhat well known in America as well. But there's a famous line that's translated in various ways, but it goes something like, food comes first, then morals. Whereas somebody translated a little bit more crassly, probably more accurately, grub first, morals later. It portrays the human being in a certain way that we need to satisfy our material needs, and then we can start to care about others. And Brecht was a communist, and so I think his view was that unless we create a just society, people will not treat each other well, because everyone's just gonna make sure that they get their food and their material needs met. Now, in America, people are really scared about communism and socialism. And rightfully so, because it's when it was turned into an ideology, it caused a lot of harm, killed many people, created dictatorships, etc. But the impulse is something like, it's a concern for our fellow human beings. Like if we just look at the original impulse, it's like the so-called proletariat of the Industrial Revolution, people who were able to live in the countryside in a more or less self-sustaining way because of the Industrial Revolution, get pulled into cities and become laborers that get exploited and live under horrible conditions and poverty and so forth. Anyway, that's just a side note. I recently read a book and then also listened to an interview by a German ethics professor who teaches in the Netherlands, and his books are all translated into English. But his name is Hanno Sauer, but I don't know if you'd be interested in that. I'll just say it. He wrote a book about the evolution of ethics. And I think it's called The Invention of Good and Evil. But it's not really about invention, it's about the evolution. And he makes a very interesting point. He says that the distinctive characteristic of the human species is large-scale cooperation. Many people have tried to separate humans from other animals. Is it language? Is it consciousness? But many people now are basically saying the distinctive feature is cooperation in large numbers. And that actually what that produces is language and technology, and because without that cooperation, all of that wouldn't exist. So the point here is that it's not that food comes first and morals later. It's that ethics comes first, and that's what produces food for groups of people. It's like to be a good person is a requirement to sustain ourselves as human beings, because we are so dependent on each other. We need to be cooperating in groups. And this is very interesting to me because it has a lot to do, and this is all setting the stage for, of course, my talk about our practice and our embodied practice. It's because ethics is not a luxury. It's not an add-on. It's actually built into, I would say, it's an existential fact for human beings. It may, ethics may not be an existential fact for mountain lions because they're solitary hunters. But it is an existential fact for human beings if we, at least right now, just make the assumption that it's true that what sets human beings, or what is the distinctive feature of human beings, is to cooperate in large numbers. And what interests me is how this ethical dimension is rooted in the body, because this is a course about embodiment. In Buddhism, compassion is a very important idea. And my interest is how this compassion is rooted in our bodily experience. When you look at early Buddhism, and I'm speaking in generalities and maybe I'm not fair, I'm trying to make a point. So you can criticize this, or somebody can criticize it, but in early Buddhism, the emphasis is on self-liberation. If you look at the legend of the Buddha, his biography, which is a legend in my view, he lives a fairly sheltered life, and he comes into contact with the existential problems of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And he realizes that even though he lives in this relatively sheltered life, I think we live, a much more luxurious life than the Buddha did, who was supposedly an aristocrat. So it applies, it's like, despite our relative wealth and shelteredness, we need to face old age, sickness, and death. And so the Buddha's journey is about how can you experience freedom under these circumstances. And there's a worldview that he's embedded in, which is a worldview of continual rebirth, and a sense of liberation, which is to find an exit from this continual rebirth. And we've already discussed the nature of suffering as having two factors, pain and pleasure, and on the one side, and resistance and grasping or attachment on the other side. So by extinguishing resistance and attachment in himself, freedom arises, and this freedom goes so deep that the desire to be an embodied form also dissolves, and you're entering into nirvana, meaning you're exiting the continual cycle of birth and death. And this view is very much, and in this view, compassion plays a role, but compassion is something like, it's a virtue to practice that really makes sense, because if you maintain openness toward other beings, feel related to them, that's one way to let go of resistance. But it is about self-liberation. You practice compassion because it aids your self-liberation. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, of which Zen is a part, the view shifts, and it's not so much about your individual escape from samsara into a realm of nirvana. But the view now is that samsara and nirvana have the same extension, as Nagarjuna says. They are the same realm. They are the same world. What really makes the difference is your relationship to it. How do you relate to the world? Either your relationship is such that the world appears as samsara, a world of suffering, or you relate to it in a way that it appears as nirvana, the world of liberation. And the whole idea of rebirth in Zen gets very much pushed to the side. Is of very little interest. The interest is this moment. Not the next life or what is the cosmological setup for us human beings. It's like, it is right now. And we are born and die from moment to moment. And what gets born and reborn is a certain kind of habit energy with which you approach this moment. And when that habit energy is extinguished, then you can live this moment freely. And when it comes back, you are right back into suffering. So practice becomes actually something you're never done with. There's not like a liberation that is complete. Liberation needs to be actualized from moment to moment. This is very much Dogen's view. I mean, you can find it spelled out directly. It's like this is happening from moment to moment. So I say this partly because when we talk about compassion, there isn't just one view here. This also, what compassion is, or what its importance is in practice, has evolved, and it can be seen from different points of view. Now, when you look at the etymology, like some people scholars look at the etymology of the word karuna, which is the word for compassion. And again, I'm not an expert, but it's just something I read. The etymology suggests that it means, the etymology meaning the root meaning of the word, is it means something like to be shaken. So it's like to be shaken by the suffering of others. To quiver. In relationship to the suffering of others. This is much more, in my view, this is much more than etymology, or, it's like, oh, the word somehow means that. This is a basic experience that we have as human beings. The fact that you can be shaken by the suffering of others. You may experience this more or less and differently in different situations, but I think, like particularly in this room, it's not something we need to first establish as an existential fact. We know it, right? You can be in the presence of somebody else's sadness, and it will have, as I like to say, a resonance in you. But I would say that it's not just about emotional resonance, it's actually about, and this is the point that I want to lead us into, it's a kind of bodily sensitivity to the appearance of anything, really. If you are resonating with the beauty of a tree or a work of art, it's the same kind of bodily sensitivity. Like we could call that a kind of aesthetic sensitivity for beauty. And I think that's the only reason why, people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, like we have different preferences and standards and so forth. But the way we can have anything like a universal appreciation of art is because we share this ability to be moved. So to be shaken, to quiver, to be, this is, the English language uses words like this, right? You are moved by something. Like, what does that mean, moved? It means that on a bodily level, something is stirring. Like we use the word stir to describe something about the heart, let's say, this is stirring the heart. Right. So we're not just in a conceptual relationship to our perceptions. What I mean by that is, when you see something, I have been talking about this experiential field, right? You have this experiential field, or everything all at once, and then your attention gets narrowed down to something, Then you have carved out an object from this whole field. We think, I talked about this last time, I think, if you remember, if I remember correctly, that the world is not made out of objects. It's not made out of separated things. It's a field of complexity. And then our attention carves out one thing and turns it into this separate object. And then it gets a name. And then our relationship becomes conceptual. You could say that in abstract art in modern times, like there's many ways we can look at this, but representational art is depicting the world as various objects arranged in a still life or in a landscape scene, and it's like there's this objectness of the world. And various artists became dissatisfied with just this representing the objectness of the world, and so they used abstraction to pull people into a more resonant relationship to what this piece of art is. It's like, because they frustrated the desire to come into a conceptual relationship with the work of art, right? You're almost, either you walk away and say, well, what's that? Or you expose yourself to the aesthetic whole of that display and allow yourself to be moved by it. Not everyone was interested in that and said, like, well, that's not art, that's, you know. But it's a play with that threshold, you know. Well, as practitioners, this is a question, actually. How do you peel the conceptual labels off of the world and come into a bodily, resonant relationship with it? How do you allow yourself to be moved by this experiential field? Now, I use the word resonance, and if you just look at resonance as a phenomenon that physics can describe, then you have a certain kind of frequency. I mean, technically, maybe you would talk about oscillation. A string of a guitar oscillates, and it oscillates at a certain kind of frequency. Now, if we ring the bell in our zendo, it has dominant frequencies at which the bell oscillates. And when there's another object, it can receive this oscillation, sound waves in this case, and when this other object has a disposition to resonate at a particular frequency, or if it has a disposition to also oscillate at a particular frequency, then you would call that resonance. Something comes, and then this object here also starts to oscillate at that particular frequency. And I think something like this is going on. This is the way we are moved. This is the way we are stirred. Now, I use it as a metaphor. I'm not trying to describe this as a kind of phenomenon of physics, but it probably is ultimately, Everything oscillates. Molecules oscillate, atoms oscillate. Everything is in a back and forth. I think there's an emphatic way we use the word resonance in ordinary language, and then people will say, like, that resonated with me, It's like, I was open to that kind of frequency that came from you. And I think there's truth to that, is because, like in physics, objects have a natural frequency, like they will oscillate at a certain frequency and not at others. So like that makes them receptive for certain kinds of frequencies and not receptive for others. But I think that we are basically resonating with all kinds of frequencies, not just with our dominant ones or our preferred ones. I mean, with our preferred ones, we have specific, deep resonances, and that's usually how the word is used, in an emphatic way. Like, I resonated with that, not with that. But when you think about openness in a much more, more expanded way, it's like you're able to resonate with all kinds of frequencies, not just the ones you prefer. Then it becomes more descriptive, less emphatic, It's like That's when I like to say we're resonant beings, which is another way of saying we're open to be moved. Now there's a problem here. I'll just pick out two, maybe there are more, but these are the obvious ones. And people talk about this to me all the time. You've heard it too. It's like, there's too many things going on in our complex world. If I'm just open to all of that and be resonating with everything, it's just completely overwhelming. Right? Too many resonances. When you're moved in this way, when you resonate, it's almost like you're also moved into responding. You're also moved into action. We can explore that more, but let's say that's true. Then, if all kinds of frequencies come from all kinds of directions and you have all these resonances, it can be overwhelming. Like, what am I going to respond to? I can't respond to everything. This is too many things. Let's call that overwhelm. And the response to overwhelm is close off, shut down. There's another problem when something is very intense, when it's not too many things, but too much of one thing. It can also be overwhelming. So then also you close down, or shut down, as we say. What is that? What is that closing? What is that shutting down? I want you to investigate that. I'm not judging it. I think to have a realistic relationship to this is to acknowledge that these two problems, overwhelm and over-intensity, let's say, right, are real. So our response is to close. Because we are developing beings, right? One thing that is also curious about humans is that we are not born and just function. Right? We need care for a long time. Like, we've put an age on it, like we say, like, okay, after 18, you're an adult, you don't really need care anymore. You can be on your own. But that's probably not true.
And be dependent on your parents' health care until 26.
Yes. But wherever you put that, age of adulthood, maybe that was, at certain times that was thought of like 14. Until then, you really need care. You're too vulnerable to be on your own. You need other people to actually doing the closing down, like the protection to not be overwhelmed and to not be exposed to too much intensity. And then also to be nurtured and to be given tools of how to function in the world. Like, I think we look at other mammals with fascination, right? It's like a calf is born, to a buffalo or an elk or a deer, right? And it's like like this for a while. It's like, and then it just gets up and walks. It's unbelievable. Like, it takes us 2 years. Not quite, but could be, Some babies take 2 years to walk. Amazing. So there's a kind of dialogue in us between closing ourselves off and opening up. Opening up, I mean, to resonances, and closing ourselves off to resonances. Now we've discussed this, right? What is the nature of the self? Sometimes suffering and liberation, as the other side of suffering, get discussed as like hinging on this illusion of a separate self. Like, if you grasp onto the illusion of a separate self, that causes suffering. If you let go of that illusion, you liberate yourself. And we've discussed, right? It's like that, and this is the gist of the discussion here, is about what is the bodily component. It's like at the core of all this is a basic contraction. A closing, you could say, and contracting away. It has a protective quality. See, I want to be realistic. I don't want to judge anything in us. I want to say, like, this contraction makes sense. This closing off makes sense. But what we need to discover, I think, is where this is extra, where it is exaggerated, where it's happening out of habit, where it's actually not necessary. And I think that's really true. Human beings develop a habit of contraction and closing themselves off, and it's not needed in many situations. It's just a habit. You could say the self is a habit. So, compassion has, no, how can I say this? Liberation and wisdom, which we've discussed, are prerequisites for compassion. If liberation is the opposite of liberation, resistance and attachment, it's like to let that go and enter into openness, if that is liberation, that's a prerequisite for truly resonating with the world. If you're caught in a habit of self, which is a habit of resisting and grasping, you're not really in resonance with the world. And wisdom can be described as undividedness, right? We've used that word. Dogen says undividedness means I'm intimate with this. The Latin word intimus means the close friend. So it's like close friendship means kind of like that you are sharing a world. I'll just say that. You are really sharing the world, not... So I often say this to myself, and then I share it. It's like when we acknowledge that we live undivided from this experiential field, then we have to say something like, you, if you look out to these other human beings that are in your experiential field, you appear in my mind. Right? And by inference, I can know that I appear in your minds. And this is a very intimate situation, to appear within each other's minds. Now, because we have a habit in our culture to separate body and mind, it's like when I say mind here, it's confusing. It's like, because usually we think of the mind as being inside, like my mind is inside. But the way I just used mind is to describe this whole experiential field that unfolds from the senses. This is your mind. I'm just inviting you into using the word that way. Dogen would use it that way. The mind is, mountains, rivers, the great earth, pebbles, lanterns. That's the mind. You can have the view that the mind is inside the body. But when you turn it around and you look at the mind as this whole experiential field, the body is in the mind. In other words, they're intimate. They're undivided. Body and mind are undivided. You can take these views, they're just one-sided. So we appear within each other's minds. This undividedness is also a prerequisite for, again, I'm talking about compassion in the Zen tradition. The way compassion is viewed in the Zen tradition is undividedness is the prerequisite for that. Because when you open up into this undivided view, now you're open for resonance. So it's very curious to me that compassion starts to be treated not as a virtue. So I'm using virtue in a certain way. It's like, or we could say it's treated as more than a virtue. Let's say a virtue is something you should do. Yeah? You should be compassionate. Or, like the ancient Greeks saw courage as a virtue. You should be courageous. Courage was seen as a sort of medium between timidity and, I don't know what the right word is, but exaggerated gung-ho-ness. There's a word that eludes me, but right. So, but you shouldn't be timid and you shouldn't be gung-ho. You should be courageous, something like that. So you should be compassionate. No, compassion is more than that kind of should that you should be. It's an existential fact. It's your capacity to resonate that comes out of openness. So rather than telling yourself, I should be compassionate, practice would be to discover and then settle yourself in the existential fact of being a resonant being. Do you see the difference? When you relate to yourself with a should, it's almost like you already divided yourself from yourself. You said like, well, I'm like this and I shouldn't be this way. I should be that way. Now you have a discussion about yourself in your own head. What the alternative is like, you're opening up to an openness that's already there. This is a different view. Now this view gets often illustrated with these sort of spontaneous acts of compassion, like if there's a little child running out into the traffic, you immediately hold it back. It's like you don't have to discuss that with yourself. It's like, should I do that? This example illustrates, right? You are in immediate resonance with the situation and know that it's not a good thing to let the child run into the traffic. Or when you find a cigarette butt, at a trailhead on a dry day, you're not like, what should I do something about that, or I'll just go about my hike? No, you extinguish the cigarette butt to prevent a fire. It's not a big discussion in your head about that. And when you see the majority of the population suffer in poverty, you become a communist. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I'm joking, right? But not really. I'm not defending communism as an ideology. I'm saying I'm giving some acknowledgement to the spontaneous impulse of not letting at the time of the Industrial Revolution, you could argue, 80% of the population suffer in poverty. And we have similar impulses right now when we look at the great divide between rich and poor people. It's like there is an impulse that's rather spontaneous. I would like you to acknowledge this in yourself. To the degree that the way you resonate with the world and are drawn out in very natural ways. People turn this into a problem all the time, right? You, like I do, like a run along Boulder Creek, and I'm encountering many homeless people. And now, when I think about it, I will say to myself, I can't help all these people, which is true, right? I can't help all of them, get them out of poverty and find a house for them and all that. It's too much. It's overwhelming. But the impulse is there. I can feel the impulse. I don't have a problem with being stirred. This is not a problem that I'm in resonance with other people's suffering. So what do I want to say here is like, just because not every way that you are moved can lead to effective action doesn't mean that you have to shut down that compassionate impulse in yourself and say like, I'd rather not feel that, because it's not satisfying to not be able to translate that into action. I mean, one of the difficulties of, I think, any life, but say a modern life, is when there's so much, it's like to be selective in what you are responding to. You can't respond to everything. That's actually true, right? I mean, respond with decisive, effective action. But in some ways, we are actually, in our resonance, we are responding to everything. And it's also interesting that we could say, like, even in our compassionate resonances, we continue to be cooperative beings. Some people will tend to that problem. Other people tend to this problem. And I tend to this problem. That's also cooperation, right? I actually don't have to respond to everything. Maybe it's enough to pick one thing and do that really well. But acknowledge in myself that all these other things are also important and support them. The way I talk about it, the way I make donations or whatever. So it's interesting, it's not really a problem. It's also a very self-involved view to say like, oh, I think I need to respond to everything, and because I can't do it, I'm going to shut down. Well, you don't have to respond to everything. We're a cooperative species. So to keep our heart open, you know. Practice, I think, is in a way endless in this way, because the instinct to close off, to shut down, to protect yourself from all kinds of resonances will come. I think you don't overcome this once and for all. It's like, it's a deep habit. Right? So practice becomes noticing that and opening up again. Noticing that and opening up again. And my emphasis here is that although this can be accompanied by clear thinking, I hope I offered some clear thinking today, although it can be accompanied by clear thinking, fundamentally it's a bodily situation here. It's the noticing of that contraction and the opening. Now, with that opening comes a challenge, resonance. Yeah, it's like our practice also becomes, what am I willing to be in resonance with again and again? In the Mahayana tradition, there's also an acknowledgement, and I close with this, that there are two kinds of compassionate action. One, you could say, is, well, it follows from understanding suffering as made out of two factors, pain and resistance, or pleasure or well-being and grasping. One form of compassionate action, you could say, is charity. Right? You take pain away from people, or you make their lives better. Create pleasure or, basic situations of well-being. That's one kind of compassionate action. It alleviates suffering. And the other form is the Dharma. You teach people about resisting and grasping. You invite them into a practice to of liberation. We could make this into a dichotomy, right? And say like, well, which path will I go? Like, will I be charitable or dharmic in my orientation? But it's not necessary. You can leave that undivided too. You can do both. You have that relationship to yourself, I hope. Right? You, in a very reasonable way, you avoid pain, don't inflict it on yourself aggressively. You only inflict it on yourself as a practice in Sesshin. Right? Why do you inflict pain on yourself as a practice? To practice non-resistance. Because there is a part of you that is practicing the Dharma, you are accepting imperfect circumstances, including pain, in order to practice non-resistance. You're doing that with yourself. But you're not like sabotaging your own well-being in some sort of nonsensical way that, upends your life. As a practice, you tolerate pain. As a practice, you practice some kind of enoughness and don't indulge in like constant consumption or something. To study what grasping is. What are you trying to cure with your own grasping? Now you can bring that same attitude that you bring to yourself, you can bring to other people. You can say like, I care about providing basic, or help to create basic well-being for people. But you can also have a dharmic attitude to how people lead their lives and say like, watch your greed, watch your hatred. It makes you unhappy. It causes suffering in your life. Now, you don't have to wag your finger, but it's, to the degree that we have that kind of wisdom, we just share it through our own life. We don't have to deny that dimension. All right. Thank you.